Good evening, everyone. My name is Tim Pollard. I'm one of the staff at LibDem HQ, although I work out of Glasgow. I've been involved with Connect pretty much since we started off with it, and I'm the person who's going to take you through tonight the Get Out the Vote side of Connect. Just while we're waiting for a few new people to join, I will go through a couple of housekeeping matters. One is that hopefully you'll be able to see you have a little hand that you can wave on your panel. If you're able to just press that now and just to say that you can hear me, that will be appreciated. Just so I can check that somebody out there is listening to what I'm saying. Excellent. Yeah, a few hands going up there. Good. Thank you very much. And the second thing is that you'll notice there is a questions box, hopefully on the right-hand side of your panel. As we go along, if you have any questions, please type them in there, and then I'll break off at various points in order to answer those. Okay, so just as a brief introduction, I'm going to share my screen with you now. Hopefully you can see in front of you quick sheet number 9, the first page of that. You can find this on the LibDem website at libdems.org.uk/skills or /Oscar_Connect. You can also find it in the Connect users Facebook group in the files area, but I'll email it out to everybody who's on this call at the end so that you've got it. And it goes through everything that I'm going to talk through today. So if you do miss anything, then you can go back to that. It goes into it in a bit more detail as well than I'm able to go through today as well. So to begin with, just a couple of things that you want to think about ahead of polling day, and not just polling day, of course, but the Get Out the Vote operation can start right now, not just for postal voters, but for everyone really. All, as far as we know, from all the evidence that we have, any contact at any time does increase turnout. The closer you get to polling day, the more of an effect it has. But there's not a great deal of difference between doing a lot now and doing it on polling day. So if you can get through everybody before polling day and then go back to them on polling day itself, that will make a massive difference to your turnout, particularly in a low turnout election. So when thinking about how you arrange your activities on polling day, there's a couple of things you want to consider. One is how strong your Connect skills are, or the people in your team. Connect, the polling day is not the day that you want to be learning how to use Connect for the first time. So I'd strongly advise that if you don't have anybody in your team who is used to using Connect on a regular basis, then I would say get all your lists sorted in advance, either sent through to Minivan or to printed out paper-wise, and then don't worry about Connect on polling day at all. Just spend the day repeatedly going around those people on your lists and just using the same list again and again, just going back to the outs each time. Hopefully, though, you do have somebody on your team who has been using Connect to send people out, to create your Canvas lists and so on a regular basis throughout the campaign. And really, the polling day principles aren't hugely different from what you hopefully have been doing with your canvassing. It's exactly the same. You create a list, you cut that list up into turfs, you send people out to knock on those turfs, you enter the data in or afterwards, or commit it through Minivan, and then you start the process over again. So another thing to consider is how big your team is, how many people that you've got to help you. If you don't have very many, then it's really important that they all go out and spend their time knocking on doors and on the phone rather than sitting on polling stations. Having people on polling stations is a useful exercise, but only in order to make the knock-up itself more efficient by taking the people who've already voted off your list. So if you don't have lots of people knocking up, there's not really much point in having lots of people sat on the polling station. Although having said that, the polling station is a useful thing for that people can do if they're not willing to knock on doors, or if they're immobile and can't do a lot of wandering around and don't want to speak on the phone. So we'll talk a bit more about telling and things later on, but really maximising people on the doors has to be your primary aim. The third factor to think about is how easy it is to get around the area that you live in. If you live in a really rural area, or if the streets get really gridlocked throughout the day, then you might want to consider trying to spread your operation out as much as possible. There's no reason now really why we need to have everything in one place like we used to, with Minivan and with the way that one person can produce the list in one place, the PDFs, and then they can be downloaded and printed off somewhere else. And with the fact that you can enter telling data in any different place, you can enter it on the polling station if you've got a smartphone with a signal, and if you haven't, then you can just take it to a house just around the corner from the polling station potentially and enter it there. So really, there's no reason why everybody needs to be in the same place. So it might be that particularly for a distant polling district, you want to just have one person who goes around and again, and you just keep sending them back new lists to their phone. Okay, so are there any questions on any of that sort of basic organisation side of things before I move on to the demonstration? Doesn't look like it, but feel free to type away if you do think of any. Okay, so this is the main Connect screen. Hopefully you'll all be familiar with that. And as I mentioned, the process of doing your Get Out the Vote operation is very similar to the process of building lists to go canvassing. So you're going to start off by creating a list. And then you're going to be looking at your districts here. So you'll want to pick local ward. So I'm going to go to Glasgow and let's have a look in the ward of Victoria Park. And I can also break down by polling district. Now it's probably the way that you want to arrange this, at least the way that I found works in the past, has been to have a folder for each of your committee rooms, and then within that folder have a search either for each polling district or for maybe for a couple of polling districts if the polling districts are very small. So you can choose a polling district here, or you can click through the polling district link if you want to select more than one. So I'll just pick one here. And then what you want to be looking for is the target pools menu. So these are preset lists that we've created so that you don't need to start from scratch every time. And so there's a couple that you'll be looking for. There's the GOTV 2018 Tory facing Shuttleworth, and then there's an equivalent Labour version as well. So that just depends on who your main opposition is. If your main opposition isn't Tory or Labour, then you'll want to make some changes to this, and I'll talk a bit more about how you do that later on. So these groups are split up into four. We've got recently contacted and needs contact. So this looks at your past Canvas data, and it also looks at your marked registers to define which group to put these in. Also splits into postal voters and non-postal voters, as you can see. So people who have an exemplary voting record and you've got them marked as having voted in every one of the last 4 or 5 years, then if you've contacted them within the last month, then we mark them as recently contacted. Whereas somebody who has no past voting record whatsoever, they will only go into the recently contacted if you've spoken to them within the last 5 days. So, and there are lots of stages in between that, depending on how many times they've voted in the last few years. So this is just designed to make your knock-up more efficient by allowing you to concentrate on the people who need contact the most. Obviously, if you've got the resources, then you should go back to all of them again, because there's no point at which an extra contact, makes people less likely to vote. So it's always worth that extra contact. But obviously, we have everybody has restrictions on the number of people that they've got to help. So you do want to use your resources as efficiently as possible. So going back to the needs contact groups just makes that a little bit easier. So I'm going to tick all these boxes for now, just see how many people that gives me. So I've got 336 people there in this polling district. So I'm just going to run that. So now on this screen, this is my list, and I can now cut some turf with this list. So this gives me the map of where these people live. And the turf cutting process it's exactly the same as you would use for canvassing, and similar to that used for when you're creating walks. So I'm just going to click on each of the corners where I want my polygons to cover, and then I go back to the first square again to complete that. And you can see here that tells me how many people, 106 people and 57 doors are in this turf. So I'll just complete another couple of turfs. And let's go up here as well. Okay, so I've got myself 3 turfs there. When you've finished, you just go to save and finish, and it will now prompt you to save this, and you might want to create a new folder for this. So I'll call this Victoria Park GOTV demo, and it's just one polling district, so I'll call this Victoria Park PD1, and I'll save that into the folder there. So it now takes me into my turfs, which is the screen that you use for organising polling day. It always defaults to the way what you were looking at the last time you were on this page. So I just need to click that edit button and change the folder that it's looking at here. So we've got the Victoria Park one. So all you do is you type in the name, and you can see that the possible options narrow down and appear for you to then select the ones that you want, and you can have more than one selected there if you want. Or you can search by date or user if it's somebody else who has created your turfs for you. So now it's going to save that filter for next time, so I don't need to worry about that again. So here is my map region, as we call it, and the 3 turfs that I created. We've got the number of people and the number of doors in each one, record of when that was last printed out or last sent to Minivan, the number of people who have downloaded that to their Minivan smartphone. For those of you who don't know, Minivan is our canvassing app, which you can download from the App Store or from Google Play for both Android and Apple devices. And then we have the progress column. This tells you in a percentage, what proportion of the people have been canvassed and the data committed back into Connect. So that's just for Minivan use that column there. And there's a direct link up here in Minivan for me to go and commit data. So when people are out knocking on doors and they're syncing, hopefully on a regular basis, I can go to the Minivan commit page. I can tick the ones that have been done. And you can see that a few people have been out canvassing today. So I can tick those and then hit commit, and that puts those into the database. So if you want to go to the turfs from the main menu, it's down here under the canvassing section. So from this page, there's a number of ways you can send these lists out for people to knock on those doors. you've got this downward arrow here. These are things that you can do to the entire map region. So we've got the refresh map region, which you want to do after you've added in any extra data. You'll want to, you've got a view map. So this just allows you to look at the map that we were looking at when we cut the turf. It's a good idea to print that out, particularly if you've got a colour printer. Print that out ahead of polling day, write on it which turf is which, and have that next to you whilst you're printing out a list and sending out different people to different places. It's very useful, so that you can you don't have to worry too much about which turf is which. You can edit the region, and I'll show you a reason why we might want to do that in a second. You can print all of the regions, so that means print the voters, a list of the voters in your region, and you can also print a region summary. And so that's not printing the actual people, but what it will do is give you a list of the different walks, like a cover sheet, along with the maps and the scripts. And that's really useful, even when you're using Minivan a lot. If you're organising your committee room, it's quite useful to have printouts of everywhere that you're sending people, because then you can hand those out as well. And they've got the list numbers on, so people can then download the list with the sheet, and they've got the sheet as a kind of memory aid, but without the whole list of people on it, which is obviously what takes up the paper. So this is what we would want to do on before polling day, when we're going maybe knocking up postal voters or knocking up other people to give them a reminder about polling day in the future. On polling day itself, you will want to edit the search to take out people who you've actually spoken to on the day. The target pool, although it does take out people who say they've already voted, or if you speak to them and they say they're not voting for us, it'll take those out as well. Because target pools update overnight, on polling day itself, you'll need to add a couple of extra steps into your search. So I'm just going to go back and do that now. So if you click on Edit Region, it takes you to your search. This is the one we looked at earlier. This is the description of the search. So I'll just click on Edit here, and that will take me back through to create a list. And the reason why I'm showing you particularly as well this way of going back into the search is because this is how you can edit it and maintain the walks that you've already cut, or the turf you've already cut. You don't want to have to go back and start turf cutting from scratch again if you just want to make one small edit to your search. So as long as you do the edit here and then click Save up here rather than running the search, then the turfs that you've created will be maintained. And that's particularly useful if you created turfs last year or for a previous election and you want to reuse them, because there's absolutely no reason why you should have to start from scratch on all of your turf. So anyway, so this is my starting list. I'm going to want to remove various people. Now, one group of people are those who we have collected telling data for, and this is held in the voting section. And we've got these two options here. We've got exclude people who have already voted on polling day, and we've got include only people who have already voted on polling day. So you need to be careful about which one of these you tick, depending on how you've set up your search here. If you put these just in the main search in step 1, then we can tick the first box. So this initial search will exclude people who've got telling data already entered. If you do a remove step by going to add step and then remove people, in that case, you'll need to tick the other one, the include only people, because it's a kind of a double negative, if you like. The remove step removes people who meet the criteria in this search. So you'd want to include people who have already voted on polling day as one of those criteria. And so those are the people you're removing. But in this initial step, if you include it in there, then we're excluding them. Hopefully that's nice and clear. But I'm going to add a separate remove step. And this is for the other main thing that we need to take into consideration, which is the answers people have given on the doorstep. So if we speak to people and they say they're not voting or they've already voted, we need to remove them. And so that question is 2018 we're looking at, and we want the GOTV section. And we've got this voted yet question, and that's the national question, which is in the national script. So we want to remove people who've said yes to that question, or that they're not voting, or don't knock. And finally, the other people we might want to remove are people who've told us on polling day that they're not going to vote for us. So there is a polling day question, a voting intention question, which is on the national script as well. So we're also going to use that. So once again, we're removing people. Again, it's a 2018 question, but this time it's a vote intent question, which is at the bottom of the list. Here we are. So yeah, polling day, local canvass England is the one that we want. So obviously I want to leave in the Liberal Democrats, but then we'll remove Labour, Con, UKIP, Green, and so on. Now I'm not ticking any. I'm not ticking any of the options down here, like most recent response or date canvassed. Hopefully you've not been using these questions for anything else. So only the data that we collect during this campaign, and particularly on polling day, will be in them. So I don't need to worry about any of those others. So having done all those extra steps, I don't want to run the search, as I mentioned before. What I want to do is to save it so that it's incorporated into my existing TERFs. And I can now pop back to use the breadcrumbs here, either to main menu or to my folder. And in the folder, if I want, I can hit refresh. And if there were any people who had met the criteria, the remove criteria that we put into that search, then you would have seen these numbers drop on this screen now. One other thing, actually, while I'm here, I will show you is the edit folder button, which is in the top right here. And this is useful just for sharing this list with anybody else. So what, oh, it's taking me to a new folder. I don't think I meant to do that. What do I call it? Victoria Park. So on the edit folder, if I click on that, here we are, that's what I was expecting to see. So from here, I can now share this folder with anybody else in my local party. So I can say to Charlie, I can add him in. So now he can go and run a committee room with those searches that I've created. And if I want him to be able to save into the folder, I can tick the box and save that as well. But hopefully that's not necessarily necessary, but it might be useful. So I'm just going to head back to my TERFs now. So now we've updated this list to use it on polling day itself. Let's look in a bit more detail about some of the things that we can do with each of these TERFs. So you can see there's a little down arrow on the end of each TERF with 4 options. We can edit the TERF, and that just means to edit the name of it. So if you do want to give all the TERFs names which are a bit more useful and indicate what, where in the ward they are, that might be helpful. I can print the TERF, or I can generate a list number for people to download to Minivan, or I can send directly to a Minivan user. So I can do each of the TERFs individually. Equally, I can tick a couple of them, and I can go to quick actions, and I can do the same thing to multiple TERFs at the same time. So once again, I can print, I can generate a list number, I can send to Minivan. If I want, I can also export. All that does is to export the detail of when these TERFs were printed and sent out in the past. So exports to Minivan, printed lists, that kind of thing, just so that if you want to keep track of how many times you've printed out each one and where you've sent people in the past, that record is in there. So that would just create you an Excel spreadsheet with that data in. So I'll just demonstrate how to print to start off with. So it's going to take me to this print screen. Now, the first time you go in here on each session, you'll need to set this up, but after that, it will remember your settings. So as long as you don't log out, then every time you come in here, this will already be set up for you just to save time. So you want the GOTV section and the poll day, not England. Obviously, if you're just canvassing, if you're canvassing ahead of polling day, of course, and you want to, you may be going back to your GOTV list to remind them all to vote, but you can use the regular script for that. We've added a postal vote question onto the end of it, so that if you do meet postal voters, or you're perhaps targeting postal voters in the next couple of weeks, then you can use the standard Canvas scripts, because obviously you still want to talk to them about who they're going to vote for and so on. But at the end of the script, you can record whether they voted or not. But looking here, just in the instance of polling day itself, obviously we tend to reduce the number of questions we ask on polling day just for speed, really, as much as anything. So here I've chosen the GOTV poll day not England, and that automatically loads the script which is associated with that report format. And likewise, there's a minivan version, the 2018 GOTV polling day England there. Hopefully you'll be familiar with what sort order options work best for you. If generally speaking your electoral register is sorted, the polling numbers are in a logical order, and you haven't sorted your streets locally to be particularly, to a particular order, then I would just take out the walk manager order option, and then you're just searching on your walks, your streets, and your poll number. Obviously, because we're using turfs here, which are different to your local walks, so you might want to take out the default walk as well. On the other options, so I mentioned that earlier that you can there's just a cover sheets option. Here you also have the option to untick the print people box if you do want to just print the cover sheets with the list numbers to allow people to download from Minivan. That's up to you. And the other interesting thing here is there's an option to exclude people who've already voted on polling day here as well. So what that does mean is that if you've entered telling data but you haven't refreshed your walks, this will still, as long as this box is ticked, it will still automatically exclude people who you've telled on polling day as well, which is quite a useful added feature, just as a double check there. So what you do now is then just hit print, and that will produce it as a PDF. So I can go to my PDF files, and you can see it started at the top there, Victoria Park PD1. Printed now, and I can hit download, and that will produce the PDF, or download the PDF to my laptop. While I'm on this page, another really useful thing that it's worth knowing, as I mentioned earlier in the introduction, one person can print the PDFs and then they can be downloaded and printed in a completely different location. And the way that you would do that is, you can see here, this screen defaults to just show you the PDFs that you've created yourself. But I can go to somebody else, and then I can hit refresh, and I can see any PDFs that they've created recently. Robin has not created any in the last 30 days, so he doesn't have any. But if I did have a list here, I'd be able to download somebody else's PDFs, anybody who's in my local party. So that's a really, really useful feature as well. Saves you having to email around lists, and particularly in the days of data protection being very important. If you are emailing around lists, you really need to password protect them, whereas doing it this way, there's no need for that. Great. So so my PDFs is up here in the top left, should you want to go back to that from the main Connect screen. So I'll just pop back into my turfs, and you can see now that there's a record now of the list number and when that was printed for each of the turfs that I've done. As soon as I hit refresh, if I it's this refresh here, the refresh map region, then that record will go, which is why you might want to use the export button at some point in the future. But for each pass, as it were, it's useful to know which ones you printed out and which ones you haven't. So just to go on the other important way that you can produce lists. So if I want to send these two to Minivan, for example, then it's a very similar process. So here we've got the Minivan campaign, which I chose before as well. So that's the 2018 GOTV polling day. Minivan campaigns are simply a way of determining what questions are available to the canvasser to fill in as they go around. And then for each of the turfs, I can specify which canvas I want to send it to from those that are available in the local party. And if I want, I can send the same list to more than one person as well, if they're going to go out in groups. Okay. So hopefully that's the knocking up side of the operation covered. For entering the data once it's done, I showed you the Minivan commit. If you are using paper, then the options really are exactly the same as the ones you will have been using for your canvassing all the way through. Using a barcode scanner is probably the quickest way of doing it from paper, but equally, if you're used to using grid view, then you can keep continuing that way as well. So do we have any questions at all from this this part as far as we've gone? I see we do. I'm having difficulty reading that. Just give me 1 second while I try and work out how we are. Right. All right, yes, Stephen has just raised a useful point, which is that, so there's a new feature on Minivan called team canvassing. And what this does, it shows you, as you go round, it will show you, assuming that you're syncing on a regular basis and that you have a signal when you're canvassing, which you don't in every area, but if you are lucky enough to have a signal as you go round, then you will get an update now as to which doors your other teammates have knocked on, and they will get an update showing which ones you've knocked on, which is quite useful, so that you don't have to be in constant contact to make sure that you do every one on the turf. The points Stephen is making is that you need to be working off the same list for that. So for that, you need to have the list number and all download that same list rather than having the list sent to people directly. So just bear that in mind if you want to try that option. Thanks for that. So I did mention that you might want to amend the standard GOTV list. And if that is the case, the way that you would do that is by adding and removing some tags. I'll just hop back to the quick sheet here. So there's these two tags under the turnout section, or the turnout subgroup of tags. There's the add to Shuttleworth tag and the remove from Shuttleworth tag. So you can add to these people individually or in bulk through bulk upload. And anybody who's had a tag added this calendar year, that will be incorporated into the target pools. So they work slightly differently from each other. The remove from shuttle tag will guarantee that they are removed from the target pool when it updates overnight. So if you, for example, if you don't want to knock up your third-party voters, so it might be that you're worried that it might be that you're using the Tory-facing target pool, and that's going to include some people who are Labour supporters, because we're hoping to squeeze them and we're hoping they're going to vote for us. If you're concerned that Labour are doing quite well in your ward and that those people might, there's a chance that Labour might actually end up beating you, or simply that those people are not switching to us and therefore it's a waste of time speaking to them, then what you can do is apply the remove from Shuttleworth tag to those people and they'll be taken out of the Shuttleworth ahead of time. The add to Shuttleworth works in a slightly different way. That if you apply that to somebody, it will only add them in if there's no other data about how that individual is going to vote. So it might be that you run a petition in your ward to save the local library, for example, and if you go to counts and crosstabs and have a look at how the people who have signed that petition are voting, the ones that you've canvassed, and if most of them are voting for us, then you might, make the reasonable decision to remind those who haven't told us which way they're going to vote. You might want to say you want to include those in our Shuttleworth as well. So the way that you would do that is that you could add everybody who has signed that petition. You could add the tag add to Shuttleworth to all of those people, but the target pool is clever enough that it will only add those people into your list if they are no data people. So it won't add them in if they've already said that they're going to vote for the opposition. It will just add them in if we don't have any canvas data on them. So you can safely add this tag to all of those people, and just the ones that we want will go into your get out the vote list. Okay, hopefully that's clear. If you want a full definition, by the way, of who is in that target pool, then once again, that's in this quick sheet, which I'll email to you after session. And it's a little bit complicated, but we try and cover all the bases. Okay. So just a couple of other things to cover, really, which are these polling day specific functions on Connect, because hopefully the TERFs is something that you have been using as we've gone through the campaign. So there's this get out the vote section, and you'll only be able to see this if you have the right permissions. Connect managers and their deputies can see this, but other users don't generally have this enabled, and that's just because we've always, a couple of reasons, we've always had feedback that people want this Connect to be as simple as possible, and because this just gets used one day a year effectively, and most Connect users aren't actually in the committee room on polling day anyway, we don't enable this for everybody. Also, in terms of entering the telling data, which is one of the things that you can do here, it's quite difficult to get that out if people enter it because they're practicing or enter it by mistake. So it's best not to have that option except for the people who really need it. So, there's two profiles. If you are a Connect manager, what you'll need to do is anybody who's working in a committee room, you'll need to give them one of two profiles. There's the polling day committee room manager option, which will give them access to both the entering telling data and the view stats. And then there's the polling day committee room operator, which will just give them access to the enter telling data. So I'll just show you quickly the telling data function. So this defaults to the most recent time, so 7 o'clock in this case, and you can click remember filters for the last place that you entered data, so you can choose your local authority and then polling district from that list, and hit remember filters so that it's the same when you come back next time. And then I'll hit next, and then here you just type a number, press return, type a number, press return, and it will bring up the name and address. It will give you a warning as well if you've entered that data before, if they've already voted, and it will also tell you if it can't find them. If you do make a mistake, then this add button becomes a remove, so you can click remove that from your list if you revise them before saving, and you have an option to go up to 25 people before you have to hit save. And we just use that for efficiency, really, so that you're not entering 100 bits of data before hitting save and then watching the wheel spin for a very long time. You can also use the plus and minus keys on your keyboard. So if a family votes together and number 100, 101, and 102 all vote together, then you can save time by clicking plus and minus. And then once you're done, as I say, you hit save all, and then you can go back to change district, and that takes you back to this screen to move over. You can change the color on your telling screen as well, to match the colours of your telling slips that have come back from the polling station, just to make it a bit harder to mix up different polling districts. And that is something that you can set in Walk Manager. For each polling district, you'll find a drop-down menu of colours for that purpose. If you need to enter telling data for people that you don't have the polling number for, then you'll need to go up to Quick Mark up in the Enter Data section. And here you can see there's an Add Polling Day Voting Data, and this will just allow you to search by name and address in exactly the same way. And there's nothing wrong with having more than one window open if you want to have this window open as well as the telling data window open, and that will just allow you to switch between the two without having to go via the main screen and wait for the pages to load. So that's telling, and then the other side is the view stats. So I'll just pop onto that. Now this page can take a bit of time to load when you change the options. So I'd really advise that you go and have a look at this in advance of polling day. It's not something that you can really use during the postal vote knock-up period, because it's only really relevant for telling stats for people that we know have voted, rather than people, the responses we've got on the doorstep. The function of this page is essentially to give you an idea as to how your voters are turning out compared to voters for the opposition or voters that you haven't identified, which way they're going to vote. So that can give you an idea as to how we're doing, relatively speaking, in different parts of the ward or different wards in a local authority. So hopefully it will mean that you can shift your resources around if you have people that you can move to places where people aren't voting, so we can try and get those people out. So the options on here, you can choose, in theory you can add in postal voters, but we can't get telling data for postal voters, so we leave this on election day. You can choose whether you want the raw numbers or the percentages. Both can be useful, so I tend to include both, but it does give you a lot of columns, so it might be that you just want to stick to the percentages only. You can break it down by polling district or any other option, but polling district is generally better because that's the level at which we collect the data, and it's quite likely that you won't necessarily be telling in every single one of your polling districts, and you wouldn't want to skew the figures by making it look like you were. Generally speaking, the rule of thumb that my colleagues use for deciding whether to have people on a polling station is kind of a rule of 200. If you've got 200 people to speak to in a polling district during the day, if you've got more than that, then you can probably save time, assuming you've got enough people to do both jobs. You can probably save time by having people on the polling station collecting the numbers as those voters go in. If you've got fewer than 200, then probably the quickest thing is actually just go around and visit them all a couple of times during the day, and not to worry about recording them. Because if you've got 50 people who are going to vote, or 20 people who are going to vote in one polling station, who are identified as our supporters, then really having someone sat on the polling station all day just to record those people is a bit of a waste of time. So the next thing you do is pick the area that you're looking at. So it could be a local authority or just a ward or your constituency. And then you can decide how you want the figures broken down. So we usually do it by canvass analysis, which splits people up into Tories, Labour, Lib Dem, and so on. So everybody who has a Lib Dem canvass analysis, or a canvass analysis that ends Lib Dem, will be included as Lib Dem. So that includes blue Lib Dems, red Lib Dems, green Lib Dems, and so on, as well as strong, weak, and just Lib Dems. You can untick ones if you want. So if you just want the main parties, or just the parties that are standing or in your ward, or just those that are fighting a strong campaign, then you can do that there as well. And then you'll get a screen which looks like this. So once you've set this up how you want, hit refresh. That will regenerate this screen at the bottom, which all this does, it doesn't give you any of the actual numbers, it just tells you what columns and rows you're going to get. So here we've got the polling district name, and we have the total of people who've actually voted. We have those who voted in the district, sorry, the total in the district is the total electorate. Then the voted in the district is the total number of people who've actually voted, and the percentage is of that, the percentage of people who voted as a proportion of the total. Then we have the 4 columns for each of the parties, just 4 columns because I've chosen percentages and raw numbers. So you can, if you want, just have the percentage columns or just have the raw numbers columns. But what this will give me is, so the total number of Tories that have voted, oh, sorry, the total number of Tories recorded in the database, that is, the total who have voted. Then it will give me the percentage of the Tories that have turned out, and then the percentage of the people who have voted overall, what percentage of them are Tories. So what we will find is that if we have a lot of Tories identified, then the percentage of them that have voted will start small and will creep up throughout the day. But the percentage of the people in the district who are Tories will be quite high throughout. If, however, the Tories are the third party in this ward, and they've got no chance of winning, then it might be that we have a very small number identified, and therefore the percentage of them that vote might be very high. So if we only had 2 identified and they both vote, then suddenly we've got 100% turnout. But the percentage of the people in the district who have voted will be very small, because if it's only 2 people out of 100 that have voted, then that's just 2%. So hopefully that makes sense. And once again, all of this is covered in the quick sheet. So if you're not following all this, then you can read the definitions there in a bit more detail. But what we'll then do is we'll look at the Lib Dem column and we'll compare it to the Tory columns. And what we want to be looking for is that the percentage of Lib Dems that have voted out, our percentage turnout, we want that to be higher than our opposition, and we want it to be higher than the overall turnout that voted in the district's percentage here. And likewise, we'd like the percentage of people who have voted who are Lib Dems to be as close to or over 50% as possible, which will depend obviously on what proportion of your electorate you've managed to canvass and how we're doing as well. So hopefully that will make sense. Once you've got this set up the way you want, then in order to get the report, then you click on Send Full Output to Exports, and that will send it to your My Export Files page. So it's a good idea to do that several times throughout the day at least, and then to download and load those and keep them for future reference, if nothing else, because it will give you an idea as to how the pattern of turnout was throughout the day in your area, which you can use usefully next time to compare. So if I go to My Export Files, you can see that it's producing that report now. It's in progress. So you can go away and do other things, and then you can go back to the My Export Files at any time to check on the progress of that and to download it once it's ready. Okay, so I think that's covered all the main aspects of this. Not had many questions there. I don't know whether you've thought of anything else as we go through. I'll give you a couple more minutes just in case you do think of anything, but I think that's pretty much covered it. As I say, I will email out this this quick sheet which goes through all the details of who's in those target boards, those steps that I talk about for removing people like knock-up data and people who've telled on the day. There's a section telling you about how to add those tags for people who've signed petitions and creating the turfs there, how to save your turfs into a folder and to share that, and then how to use the My Turfs screen as it is there and the different options that are available on the My Turfs screen, how to print your knock-up sheets. And one thing we haven't talked about actually is the creating phone banks for your knock-up, so I can show you that briefly as well. These are the knock-up sheets actually, and one feature that these have, if you are using the printed ones, is that there are 2 columns of knock. So what this essentially means is that you don't necessarily need to do a reprint. Obviously, reprinting will allow you to take people off who've been telled, but if you're not doing telling in a polling district, then actually there's no need to reprint. So you can use this list and you can send it out again, and the person who's doing knock-up 2 will be able to see what happened on knock-up 1 and whether they need to go back. So I've talked about the different ways of entering telling data. Oh, this is one option that I haven't mentioned, is the telling data on your smartphone. So there's a website, and this is different from the Minivan app. The Minivan app is an app which, as I mentioned, doesn't necessarily need a signal in order to be able to allow you to go canvassing with it. This is a website at telling.libdems.org.uk, and there we are. It's just the web address is just there, and that allows you to enter an 8-digit code to identify your polling district. And then you can type in each number as you go, each polling number, and hit submit. And that will put the data directly into Connect to save anybody else having to do a data entry task in addition to that. This 8-digit number is one that you will need to request in advance. So please do put in a support request for that, and we can get you those near the time. Unless you have a by-election, then probably best to leave it till the last week, or at least till after the final register update. I think we have one more register update to go before polling day, and in some cases the 8-digit number will change after that register update. So not in all of them, not in most of them, but in the odd case it will do. So we just, for that reason, we just hand those out after that point. And I mentioned the turnout stats and the different options on there. And you can see there's a bit more detail there as to what those numbers mean. Oh yes, and finally there's the polling locations page where you can enter the addresses of your polling stations. You'll find that just here on the left-hand side, polling locations, and if you click on that, you can specify your local authority. And then for each one, you can type in the polling station address. And then that will appear in Minivan, it will appear on the knock-up sheets, and it can appear in the phone bank as well, just so that your canvassers can answer any questions on the doorstep about where people vote. Just be aware that it is the first column here which appears on the walk sheets and so on, or the canvas sheets, not the location description or the address. So I wouldn't use these other ones if myself. Just use this first one and get all the information in there that you want to appear on on those lists. And yes, the final thing I mentioned was about setting up phone banks. So you do that from, if you've loaded a turf or a list, then you go to phoning and set up virtual phone bank. There is now the option to use both a static list or a set of search criteria. So if you're going to use the search criteria, you can go in from a different route, or you can if you do it from this route, it will force you to save it again, give it a new name, and then build your list off that. If I build it off a static list, first of all, it's just a case of giving it a name. The start date and end date. There are a number of options here which do make a difference. So you've got, usually the householding, you would show all in household if you're canvassing, doing regular canvassing. For a polling day operation, you probably just want to show only people in household from the virtual phone bank list, because that way you won't waste time talking to people who aren't on our list to knock up. The other thing is there's an option here as well, just like there was on the telling sheets, or the knock-up sheets rather, to exclude anyone with telling data entered. And actually that's, as long as you tick it before you build the phone bank, before you hit save, then that will remove people as that data is entered. So regardless of whether you use the static lists or the search lists, as telling data is entered, those people will be taken out of your phone bank, just making it that bit more efficient. So then you can hit save and preview, and that will allow you to see what the caller is going to see, or you can just hit next. And here it gives you the virtual phone bank code, which you can use the copy button. And you can share this with other people in your local party who might want to do that calling in the same way that you did before. You can also now send to round 2, and unlike previously, one of the new changes is that when you hit send to round 2, this virtual phone bank code will stay the same. So you don't need to give out new codes throughout the day. And anybody who's in that phone bank probably won't notice as well that you've sent it to round 2. They don't need to go out of the phone bank and go back in again. As far as they are concerned, nothing will have changed, but you will have sent it on to round 2, and all of the people who were out will have gone back into the phone bank, and they'll be on to the second call through. And you can keep track of that on the phone bank lists page, and you can also add new phone banks from here as well, which is particularly useful if you are. This is where you can use a previously saved search to build a new phone bank from as well.